The performance here now went very well. I really enjoyed the aspect that there were some unexpected moments within the show. For example, I planned to do live painting on stage, but I got two youth who came up and wanted to paint, so I let them paint and they took over the canvas. And also, the reaction from the audience was so strong and empowering. I didn't expect that much interaction from the audience is in the question and answer section. So I think the performance did really well, and the next step would be to tighten it up and present it as a more fluid package. Because in this performance, as a performance, I wanted it to be live and electric and open it up to chance, see what would happen. Now it's back to the drawing board, and I have to fine tune it and present it as a more polished theatrical performance.
So thank you very much. My name is Victor Mavedzenge. I am from Zimbabwe, and I'm here now, as the title of the show implies. There shall be some people coming in, and the ambient noise from the restaurant, so just excuse that. I will try to be as loud and clear as possible. Sometimes I'll be off mic when I'm painting or doing some other unexpected stuff as performance usually has in store for you. So I would like to welcome you very much to it. I shall be in character. So in other words, what I'm trying to do with this show is really get into the heart of it and give you the feeling of an immigrant, somebody who's away from home. I want to tap into the emotion of being uprooted. I want to tap into uncertainty when you walk down the street and you're unfamiliar with what's going on. So I'll be very much in character, but for those in the front row, please do not be afraid. It's a very safe show. Nothing shall fly off stage, and you will be okay. And if I happen to point at you, it's nothing personal. You just happen to be there. All right? So we shall start in the next 30 seconds. Our story begins in London, England, on the cold, grey pavements that paved my life into a new society. I had arrived in London when the days had become shorter. Little had I realized that these things do happen in other parts of the world. That comes as a shock if you come from a nation that's blessed with sunshine 365 days a year on a very consistent basis. My arrival in London was far from what I had imagined England to be. Coming from Zimbabwe, I thought London would be paved in gold, so they say. I had no idea that if this was the center of the machine. This was where industry had its heartbeat. This was where the diary meant life. I gradually walked into this system without knowing. And like a cockroach that's unwanted in the kitchen, I was swatted left to right, not by people, not by pesticides, but rather by confusion. I looked for water, but my roots, like I said, were uprooted. My source of inspiration was left back home. I began to feel much like the fish in the net, slowly rising to the surface and realizing this could be the end. But I refused to die. For some reason, I refused to give in to all that, for I had a way of surviving. I had the art to depend on. Painting became not a profession, but it became more like a mode of survival where I had to tap into each and every brushstroke and realize that my very survival depended on it. Because in that brushstroke was familiarity. There was something I knew, something I had done before, so I stuck to it. And I held on to it for dear life. I am from a place of at the back of the world, the dark lit corridors that history will not acknowledge. I am from a family of hard work and humility and freedom. I am from a proud heritage that was torn apart, disregarded, disrespected, disenfranchised, disdained, distanced, destroyed, demarcated, segregated, and segmented. I am from a place where old men smile showing broken teeth, and from the hot sun burning grass swaying and love calling at you at 3 o'clock when it was time for that milk and cookie. I am from black and white TV nights. I am from the sounds of birds chirping and the chatter, clitter clatter chatter of the neighbors in conversation. I am from angry diesel trains, trying, grinding, coughing, trying to make it uphill. I am from respect for the next person. I am from a world of we and not me. I am from rocking your Sunday best on Christmas Day. And I am from first you, I got your back. I am from it's all right, we'll get through it. I am from laughter, pain, and I am from silent nights where the world still went to sleep. I am from community. I am from strength. So, as I walked through the streets of London, I began to search for faces and places I might know. Where I came from, it was a sea of black. It was a sea of darkness where all the faces were potentially black, because that was where we came from. If you were white or Chinese, you were either an immigrant or a familiar face I disregarded as a different face from me. But hitting the streets of England, London, England, a sea of white engulfed me. The mind rests on familiarity. The mind depends on that which it is familiar with. And it became a shock because all these faces I see now, I did not know. The only white people I knew, 5 of them in our city, I knew by name. They were my friends, some. But now I became engulfed in faces I had no connection with and no recognition of. I began to reel down, I began to spiral down, and down I went. Suddenly, I realized nobody would make connection. Looking at somebody in the eye was more like saying, I want something from you. I was met with sideburns, and I was met with gazes looking down instead of at me. I yearned for connection. I yearned for connection so much that I began to disregard the fact that I was so far away from home. I just wanted to reach out and touch another human soul and say, are you there? Can you feel the heartbeat of the machine? Are we together in this? Or am I alone in a nasty dream that I cannot wake from? But each time I stretched out, I found myself daydreaming, deep, deep, deep down, 10 stories down underground where the trains ran. Another foreign concept. Here is an African boy who had come from a nation where there was one train and it ran overground. Suddenly you put me underground 10 floors down and tell me there's a train running down there. My mind began to break even more. Fragments of memory I could see like shattered glass floating away into the space, into the abyss. I began to daydream of faces I knew. I began to get into conversation with people who weren't there, saying, remember when we used to play in the grass? Remember when we used to play hide and seek and you're not there. Suddenly, my stop is up. I have to get off the train again. That is the artistic mind taken away from home. But it was not all dark days. It was not all ugly, as I might paint it to be. Because one other element of survival from whence I came was humor. We learned to look at ourselves and laugh wholeheartedly from the gut. Laugh so much that our laughter became a part of our whole body, where we laughed and we stomped our feet as if our feet would fall into rhythm with that laughter. London had a funny weather. When I say funny weather, I mean when it's so cold, that you get out of your house and you have to swear, it is not normal. It is not good for you. I was not prepared. They do not give you a manual for this to say, okay, this is your London manual. Get ready for the weather. Now for me, I'm okay with people not talking to me, but I have a problem with wind that blows from every direction. And also at something like 25 miles an hour or more. Now, come on people, we have a problem here. If you add cold to the weather, temperatures usually 0 in the morning. Now, if you're used to sunshine like we have here in the Bay Area, thank goodness I landed in the Bay Area finally. But if you're used to the sun, and then suddenly you're hit with cold and gray, something happens to you. I remember a time when I was reading the paper and they said, well, most people are suffering from SAD, which is SAD, in other words, seasonal affective disorder. And I laughed my head off when I was back home, like, oh, those silly Westerners. Oh, how can that be a disease? How can you suffer from lack of sun? Yeah, you can. Totally can. Because I got into a space where suddenly I would not greet, I would not look you in the eye, I would not leave my flat unless it was for necessities. When I had to do what was needed to be done, I became antisocial. I became a hater of everything that existed because it failed to connect with me. I began to hate every brick that built that bloody London. I began to hate it with everything in my body. And I began to write. Because when I first got to primary school, Zimbabwe was colonized by the English. And we sang London Bridge is Falling Down. We had no clue what London Bridge was. And we sang it faithfully. And My Fair Lady sounded like a weird phrase, but we sang it anyway. And I began to look for reasons to hate this place more. And what I came up with was, why did you colonize us? Why did you come here? I began to write. I began to write poetry that was filled with hatred. I began to charge at them with ink and paper. And this is the result. Bury the thoughts, 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 bury the thoughts in shallow graves, for soon they shall rise. In this silence lies a bitter truth. What goes around, comes around. Bury the thoughts, bury the thoughts, bury the thoughts, bury the thoughts in shallow graves. Water them with bitter sadness, for soon they shall rise. What you took from us, we shall gain back. The land you farmed, blood shall run from it, for our ancestors cry still in their graves. Did not Bob Marley come through and say, Zimbabwe? Did he not sing for us to say that we are free now? Free from what? Bury the thoughts, bury the thoughts, bury the thoughts. Bury the thoughts of revolution, shallow graves, bury the thoughts in shallow graves. Let the rains wash them of their bitter sadness. Of resurrection, be sure. Between now and then, embrace the madness. Bury the thoughts in shallow graves. Time, the hidden voice, shall bring forth that concealed. Time, the alchemist, shall nurse our bitter wounds. Heal these deep wounds. Time shall cool the moment's desperate desire. Time shall give you yours. And in my madness, in my anger, I realized something else. There was a small, faint voice whispering to me, it's not about anger. Anger won't get you there. It was then that I realized I was part of this. Much as I wanted or much as I did not want to be, I was part of this.
To survive London, I had to paint. I had to paint like it was the last brushstroke I laid down on the canvas. I had to paint to connect with those back at home. I had to paint to keep my sanity. Everything drove me crazy. The weather was cold, the people were cold, the pavements were cold.
I told you.
The doves kept flying in my face, and the wind blew from all directions. All directions. I had to go 10 stories down into the belly of the earth to catch a train. A very, very foreign concept to me. This drove me crazy. The days were short when I got to London. Not good. I had never seen a day shorter than that given by the Lord himself. And who had shortened these days? Everything about this place was unfamiliar to me. And I slowly began to lose grip of reality. There was none to be gotten of, because everything was so unfamiliar. And when I painted wild, I painted like a madman. And there within the brushstrokes lay the only breath of life I could take. London, it is far from what I had imagined it to be. I'd always thought it would be paved in gold and Big Ben would be shining in the bright sunshine, but instead a grey fog, the London fog, engulfed almost every day of my existence in the city. Big Ben, not as impressive as I thought he'd be. London Bridge, wonder why we had to sing that in school. I always reel back to that very day when I started kindergarten. Nothing was familiar. I spoke no English. I always reel back to that day. That terrible day. When I had to write 150 times that I should not speak in my mother tongue in the playground or at school. It was against the rules. And here I am in London. Oh, London. This is from where he came. He who scarred with every touch of his fatal hand.
He had dreams and schemes to conquer every nation from Cape to Cairo, to rape every nation from Cape to Cairo, line them up in a row and brutally brainwashing the mortals of the land. Now in the Matopos lies he dead, who was scarred with every touch of his fatal hand, leaving scar upon scar, wound upon wound, and sore upon sore. There upon a thriving land came he, proclaiming pagan every native religion, and all in a rage to realize his dream, to conquer the land from Cape to Cairo, leaving scar upon scar, wound upon wound, sore upon sore. Slowly we trace the path he trod, leading us far across the seas. On a gloomy English morning came we upon Big Ben, and this is from where the dreaded hand came, that wished to sleep with every nation in a row, leaving scar upon scar, wound upon wound, and sore upon sore.
Thoughts of rebellion, thoughts of war, thoughts of bloodshed, thoughts of fighting back, thoughts of freedom, thoughts of ground laid down dust of those buried alive thoughts, thoughts of home destroyed, thoughts, 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 thoughts of those buried alive, thoughts of those tortured, thoughts, thoughts of stolen dignity, thoughts of stolen freedom, thoughts, thoughts, thoughts of people running away from home, thoughts, thoughts, thoughts.
In May 2005, there were police came into the villages. They came into the townships. They came to raid. They came to clean up. They came to make things sane and proper. They destroyed homes with bulldozers, and they threatened you with AK-47s if you threatened to retaliate. They told you your home was not legal. They told you you had no right to build a back structure in the back of your home. They told you you could not plant a garden to feed yourself. They told people who looked like me, told me I had no right to exist in my own land. I buried the thoughts. I buried them deep, deep, deep down until I escaped. I jumped off and landed in a land far away, a land for more promise, a land where I could at least live. Imagine this, if you will. If by tomorrow the dollar you hold holds no more value than it did yesterday. Not only that, imagine if it doesn't even exist anymore. If it's been replaced by a new currency. One with more zeros to accommodate your imagination and make you feel that you're richer than you actually are. They gave us billions. We smiled. We laughed. The billions would not buy bread the next day. They gave us millions and trillions. We smiled. We laughed. And they taunted us in our faces, calling for a fight, for they have the AKs and we had nothing in our hands. And we retaliated with nothing but smiles and said, look, this is what you do, and this is what we do. We lived. And to live meant to connect with the next person and say, are you going through what I'm going through? Because if I'm going through what I'm really going through alone, I cannot do this. There was no need for words in that space, because a look alone could connect you to the next person and make you realize, yes, I'm not alone in this, and we can do this. Much as I hated London, England, I admired how much their system worked. I admired how much they had UB40, unemployment benefits. I admired how it was abused by the very people who benefited from it. And I admired how the trains came in on time, every time. I admired how many buses ran through the city. I admired everything about it, and I hated it with a vengeance. There were kids one day. This is the lighter part, by the way, so this is where you can breathe. There were kids one day, and they were playing. As they came from school, they were playing on the bus, and I watched them as they played. But I had to watch my gaze, because if I stared too long, I might be called strange. If I connected, my gaze met your gaze, I might be called weird. So I watched from the corner of my eye using my peripheral vision, and I realized how far from what I had grown up they were. They were different. They were wild in the nature. They tore each other's hair in play, and they cussed as if it was a free country, of which they thought it was, but I could see more than that. But they had an anger within them that I could not understand, a passion so contained that I could not get a grasp of. But it was the anger that got me. I was not the only angry one. I was not the only one running to and hiding and seeking and trying to blend in. It seemed everybody was. I had friends in London come to visit, and we have a saying back home that I'm okay if you're okay. So if things are not okay, this can become like, I'm okay if you're okay. How are you? I'm okay if you're okay. It can go on for minutes. And then you realize we're not okay. So I met a friend and we were in banter in the streets. I'm okay. Are you okay? I'm okay. Are you okay? The police came and he disappeared. Not by the hand of the police, but by his own feet. He took off. I've never seen a man run so fast. When I later caught up with him, he said, I'm illegal here. They don't want me here. And if they catch me, they'll send me back home. I cannot go back home, for I've created a prison for myself. I tell people at home I'm okay. I tell them I have a job. I tell them everything's fine. And the money will come soon. So I can't go back home. The funny thing, I can't stay here either. They don't want me here. Then he looked at me and looked down and said, you're lucky you came in on a scholarship, but do you feel like you belong? And I said to him, no, I run, I hide, and I blend just like you. Because there's no way I can live in a society that's so beaten down and not feel that pain myself. Any human being would connect with that pain no matter who they are. But somehow, there were people of steel who were walking through the streets who failed to connect with that. And the beast, the machine turned on. So I painted. What you see on the screen is a real note. It's a $50 billion note. I think it's one of the biggest, highest notes in history. But why I bring it up is because it didn't live for more than 3 months. After its introduction, it was worthless. It just became paper. And that's what we have to live through. And we would make jokes like, I get paid $50 billion. How much do you get paid? And he said, when? And my friends would say, when are you talking about? Next week or next month? Next month I should be a trillionaire. And we laughed about it. But we laughed even more when we looked at history and when we laughed at how Germany went through this, how they carried money in wheelbarrows to go and buy bread. We couldn't even carry money in wheelbarrows to go and buy bread because there was no bread to be bought. The supermarkets were empty. It hit me hard when I stood in a supermarket in London to buy soap, and I realized that I didn't know which soap I wanted to buy. There were so many choices of soap. Soap to make you clean, soap to make your skin soft, soap for soap's sake, soap without a name, soap in blue, soap in green, all kinds of soap. I became so disgusted by the amount of choices that I left without soap. Choice. We choose. Like the artist I am, I began to digest it and think, if choice can dictate us so much, can't I choose not to live this very existence and be much happier than I am? So I wrote. I faced a little boy who had to write 100 times on the chalkboard, I shall not speak in my mother tongue. A true story. When I was in primary school, it was against the rules to speak in your own tongue because you had to learn English because it was good for you. Which is true. But, yeah. A little soldier struggled. At least let me die knowing who that little boy was, knowing what that little boy loved, how he spoke of himself and what he valued. Let me die knowing how this little boy looked at the world before. He was shamed by writing 100 times, I shall only speak in English. Let me know how he felt about himself when he was told not to speak in his mother tongue. Language holds in itself our history. That being memories of trials and tribulations that come through with ums and ahs and faint expressions you can't write on paper. That was which I was not allowed to speak in. There, at the page, occurred the cold-blood murder of a son and daughter, when the mother's tongue was cut and left bleeding. Let me know what he had been through before the horrendous and selfish act. Selfish was what he had grown up knowing. So I see from the remnants of his life that there was before a history of selfishness. A history of selfishness. I come from the breadbasket of Africa, of Southern Africa. We produce more food than we needed. When I was a kid, we used to have blue cheese in cute little triangles because we farmed. Then we were free. Everything changed. For 30 years, we watched this country slowly go down as our own people took over. Suddenly, there was no blue cheese. Yogurt disappeared. We became our own enemies. Brothers were after brothers. I had lost home before I'd even left home. This I realized when I was kneeling face down, looking at a puddle in London after I had tripped. For it took me way back to primary school when the same incident happened and I had tripped and fallen. And a bully hung over me and said, get up boy, show what you got. And as I looked at my reflection with the tall historic buildings of London, I realized I had been bullied for far too long. That little boy was still crying and I had not nursed him. I had not taken the time to say, it's okay, we'll get through this. I began to look at life differently. I began to look for smiles instead of anger. I began to paint pictures of happiness instead of darkness. Intermission. So feel free to go to the bar